So just to give you guys a little bit of a explanation to begin with, I want to explain to you guys what I mean when I'm talking about trauma. So when I'm talking about trauma, I'm talking about the energetic kind of violation that happens in an instance, like, so in a moment, like a car crash, or when, if you've dealt with something like abuse, or if there's been, a accident that has happened, whether it's physical or whether it's emotional, it doesn't matter. It's about this energetic violation to your body, essentially, to your mind, to your soul. And it creates stuck energy in the body, because what happens is we go into some kind of fight, flight, or freeze in that moment, because we can't just let the trauma do its thing. We can't play out the trauma cycle like a dog. We are going to, and I'll explain that in a second if you're like, what the hell? We are going to protect ourselves. We are going to get out of the situation. We're going to shove it down. We're going to get into a control mode. So if you've ever seen dogs, when they're scared, they shake. And they shake because they're releasing trauma. You've probably felt this before, where you're shaking, you're releasing trauma, you're releasing all of this energy. But very often we don't allow ourselves, because we either don't know to, or we literally can't. Like, you're in the middle of a car accident, for example. We don't know to actually sit there and let our bodies shake. And so what happens is we then harbor that trauma in our bodies, and then we go on living with life. Then as we go on living with life, we get triggered by different instances. And when we get triggered, our body is reacting as though the initial trauma happened in the first place. Like, again, right? It's not, our body isn't recognizing, oh, it's just Aunt Sally making a rude comment to us. Our body thinks we are being horrendously bullied at school all over again. We react as though the initial trauma is happening again. And so what happens is we go through this trauma cycle. And I actually was going to pull up can you still do like a shared screen here? Yeah. I was actually going to pull up the trauma cycle for you guys in this, so I can give you like a visual. We'll see if it works. But if you want to see a diagram of what I'm talking about with the trauma cycle that I'm explaining to you guys, it's in the Queen Alchemy Masterclass. If you actually comment Queen25 on this Instagram live, you'll get sent the link to be able to watch that masterclass. There's a visual in there along with many others. What happens is that initial, so you get triggered by something. Whoa, did you guys see those love hearts? What the hell? You get triggered by something. Then after you get triggered by something, you have some kind of coping mechanism to make yourself feel better about the fact that you're triggered in that moment. But what happens is we keep just living our life with these fucking coping mechanisms. But we learn to then think our coping mechanisms mean we're fine. We think that being a control freak, we don't recognize that as actually a coping mechanism for trauma. We just see that as like part of our personality, right? We don't realize that. Hopefully that worked for you, Maura. Because I've never actually got someone to do that on Instagram Live before, but I would think that it should work. We don't recognize that, the fact that we have raging IBS, that's our body stuck in a trauma response. We don't recognize those things. We just keep moving on. We don't recognize the fact that another coping mechanism, that we're binge eating at nighttime, we don't recognize that as a comfort mechanism. We just normalize it. We see it as binge eating, or we see it as something else. And so what that does though over time is it makes us believe we're fine. And the reality is, to an extent, you're fine. But I don't want you guys to just be fine. I want you to feel free in your body. I want you to feel like, and this is so possible for you, I want you to feel like you are truly showing up as the version of yourself that you want to be. When I say, oh, I want you to feel like you can be your dream self, or when I say, do you want to be your dream self this year? I don't actually mean that as like a fluff term. I actually legitimately mean that. Like, if you look at testimonials, these women have become the dream version of themselves, and you can have that too. But when we are keeping ourselves trapped because our ego doesn't want to face the ugly parts, and our ego doesn't want to have to deal with our shit, when we keep ourselves trapped in this trauma cycle, we are keeping ourselves very trapped in a life filled with comfort zones, fear, limiting beliefs, control issues. We aren't actually feeling in alignment, right? What gets you to feel in alignment is getting rid of all the things that are making you feel like, oh, it's weird if I go and do that thing, or, oh, what will people think if I go and do that thing? Or I don't want people to think, oh my God, who is she? all those thoughts in our heads, they only exist because of a past that we haven't allowed ourselves to heal from. And every single person has work to do, okay? When we get triggered, our body, our nervous system reacts as though the trauma is happening for the first time again. And then the best bit, well, actually it's the worst bit, is that I like to say it creates this kind of like snowball effect, not in a good way, where actually then it just piles on more and more and more energy from the initial trauma. So let's say if you're looking at the visual, like the screen of this, let's say the initial size of your trauma, like the energy in your body was this big. Let's just say it was this big, right? And then over 5 years of you continuously getting triggered and triggered and triggered because you haven't healed this thing, whatever the root of this thing is, now the energy is this big. Then you add, another 5 years on. Of course, I have toilet paper here. Don't even ask. Now it's this big. And so over time, this ball of energy in our body just gets bigger and bigger and bigger because we have not healed the initial situation. But once we've healed that initial trauma, it's gone. And then we're no longer triggered. And when I say no longer triggered, by the way, ladies, I don't mean like, oh, now it means that the tools to use in the moment to like breathe deeply and not get triggered. No, I mean, literally the trigger doesn't exist anymore, to the point where you're going to be like, what the fuck? I wasn't triggered by that. Like, as though I've done a magic trick on you. That's what it will feel like. Okay. Just so we're all clear on that. I've talked about that before when clients send in like, oh my God, it happened. I get what you're now talking about on Instagram. When you're saying like, just all of a sudden you're no longer engaging like that anymore. And you kind of have to like do a double take on yourself. That's what I'm talking about.